So we're going to be combining techniques to create value in texture. All right, and we're going to be using these examples here just to kind of help us with a reference, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take this little guy over here and I'm going to redraw him over here. Now, any opportunity I get to practice proportion, sighting, and so on and so forth, I'm going to go ahead and take. So the first thing I like to do is anytime I'm drawing something is I try to find some lines, some angles that kind of help me understand how the figure is sitting, okay? Or, you know, the position of my subject. This helps me because then when I come in over here and I start to draw in some of these lines and these shapes, okay, I could actually do it fairly quickly. All right, and I'm not necessarily spending a lot of time on this. Now notice here too that my lines are very light. That's because I'm using my 4H pencil. Okay, so that way if I make a mistake, I could actually erase it a lot quicker or a lot easier, and I'm not really committed to anything. And that's kind of the point right now, is I'm not really committing to anything major, right? And I'm not really concerned with getting this guy in here perfect, okay? I'm getting it as close as I can in a short amount of time, all right? Notice I kind of stayed away from details, right? Even though they're in there. All right, hey, you know what? That's not bad. That's a good start, okay? Now, before I move on to actually rendering and using other techniques, the first thing I'm going to do then, even though I drew really, really lightly, is I'm going to go ahead and lighten my lines using my kneaded eraser. All right, so I'm going to warm it up. Remember, a kneaded eraser really doesn't work well if it's cold, so you got to warm it up. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and dab a little bit on it, just so that way my lines get a little bit lighter. That way I'm not going to have outlines around the different parts. I'm going to be relying solely on value. Now, this guy's pretty light, right? But he's not white, okay? And I could tell because look at the paper. The paper itself is technically my white, okay? Even though the paper's slightly off-white, okay? The paper itself is my white. So the first thing I'm going to do is when I look at the textures, identify that which technique is going to help me create value while also replicating as much as possible the texture, right? What this little guy feels like. So which texture is that? You know, you've got your line proximity, you've got your crosshatch, you've got your scribble line, rendering modeling. I mean, there's other ones too, but those are the four that we primarily focus on, right? And with this, it's usually scribble line is going to be helping me. Now, before I put some scribble line down, the reason why I talked about that he's not white is if you notice that because he's not white, if I do a scribble line, all right, you'll notice that wherever the lines don't go over each other, I get little white gaps. Well, I want to avoid those things. So what I'm going to do in here is I actually come in here and I'm going to actually, excuse me, I'm going to render and model this little guy lighter than he really is, and I'm going to create some base value. So then I take my blending stump. Right, so all I'm doing is just creating a little bit of base value. All right. Okay, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm not going to do the rest of it. Okay, you definitely do the rest of it, okay? But now that I've got this base value in, now what I want to do is go a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead and use my HB pencil, because remember, combine your pencils. The 2H will only take you dark enough, or, you know, far enough. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start to actually add in some of these other darker values, but I'm going to actually be using my scribble line to kind of create a little bit more of this fuzziness. And yeah, some of you will notice that it's not all scribble line, right? You could actually see that some of it is line proximity as well. Yeah, so what you're doing is you're trying to recreate as much of the texture as possible as you see it. So scribble line works out really well, especially as a good base. And then I could come in here and start to add in some more details with my scribble line. Notice that wherever my eyes go, that's really where I'm going. So I'm like working on this little guy as a whole, right? I'm not really trying to just develop one area at a time. I'm really trying to get all of them in there. You start to notice that it starts to look a little bit more like that, right? Look at my shadows in here. I could come in here and start to darken those things up. And so that's what I'm really trying to do, is develop this little guy to look more like this, practicing the different techniques that I've used. Okay. And remember, it's don't overthink. Just really play with the textures, play with the techniques to see what they can do. Okay? I think you get the idea, right? All right, go for it. Go for it. Have fun.